Hey guys, it's Jason Snavely, certified wildlife biologist and founder and president of Drop-Tine Wildlife Consulting, the Drop-Tine Seed Company, and of course, Drop-Tine Podcast. Guys, I've 17 years private wildlife consultant, graduated from Mississippi State University, and one of the things I really enjoy doing is traveling the country and watching dreams of taking a small piece of property and turning it into something really, really special. All right, welcome back to the Drop-Tine Podcast. Before we get started with today's show, I'd like to announce two new products that are both 3 or 4 years in the making. The first one has already been, well, actually both of them are selling and doing really good considering we haven't really promoted them. The Drop-Tine Ancient Grains blend, which we're going to cover today in great depth with a very, very special guest. Actually, in my opinion, the undisputed pioneer and thought leader in ancient and heritage grains. So I'll leave that at that. But the second product won't have too much time to talk about today, so I'm going to mention it right now. It's already selling. It is called Revive DT. It's an extremely low-rate liquid foliar plant nutrition, and I know a lot of you are thinking, well, you're probably surprised to hear me say that. Make no mistake about it. Plants fix dirt. Full credit to my partner, Dr. Rick Haney, on that one. And plants are, in fact, the carbon inlet to our soils have been severely degraded by the chemical agricultural practices that have become mainstream for more than 100 years. As a biologist-led company, we place priority on restoring the microbiome and the soil, of the soil, and regenerating ecological function to our regenerative wildlife food plots. And after several years of research and some very unique production process, we're super excited to offer this extremely unique liquid foliar plant nutrition and immunity product. The micronutrients in Revive DT, liquid foliar plant nutrition, are actually formulated with the assistance of a very complex natural chemistry that has allowed us to increase the photosynthetic efficiency of plants so that we can fix dirt a little faster. This isn't for everybody, but for those who think I've been told by a lot of clients and customers, Jason, I don't have enough time to wait on nature's timeline. I respect nature, but I need to fix dirt faster. I don't have much more time left. So this is not only for those folks, it is a more natural way to feed plants photosynthetic efficiency. So anyway, I'm juggling with my audio, my mic here. This is not a synthetic fertilizer. I'm just going to give you a couple really quick points, and this is for sale now on the updated Drop-Tine Seed website. You've got bioavailable nutrients for maximum absorption. It's a liquid foliar plant nutrition that gives the most bang for the buck. Just spray it on. Extremely low input rate. That was a key one for me. Enhanced immunity. It mitigates environmental stressors, supports substantial growth periods, maximize plant performance and reproduction, addresses the cause of oxidative stress, absorbs better used completely, positive biolongevity and biomagnification, and of course, environmentally friendly. And here we go. You spray this on at a super low rate, 16 ounces. So imagine a water bottle per acre, diluted with 20 parts water. So in other words, you have a 16-ounce water bottle of Revive with 2 gallons of water per acre. So that's a very, very low application rate. Just imagine applying a 16-ounce bottle of water to an entire football field. Or if you're into moonshine, I guess like me, it would be half of a quart-sized mason jar of Revive DT with 2 milk jugs of water. So again, Revive DT is on the website, Drop-Tine Seed.com. Super excited about that one. It's already been shipping, and I'm looking forward to immediate feedback this year from all of you. So I'm going to get on with my intro several years ago. This is going to be fun for me, our guest today. I've had some great conversations with him, and I think you're going to find him to be a true treasure. Many years ago, I started doing a deep dive on, as most of you know, incorporating more diversity into our plantscapes for whitetails and other wildlife. And I ran into several great people who knew a lot more than me. Names that come to mind are Fred Provenza, Dr. Rick Haney, and of course, Gabe Brown. And then other younger guys like David Kleinschmidt I would add in there. These are guys who really made me think and encouraged me to keep going, even though others were laughing and said that hunters won't buy all of these crazy species for food plots. And here's the best part, deer don't even eat them. So I bounced around, and I was eventually told that some of these species that I wanted were even noxious and invasive. I sat back and I thought to myself, these are the same people who spray glyphosate, 2,4-D, and every type of chemistry known to man all over the life in the soils. So I kept trudging forward. I knew I'd have to keep going. I finally settled on a handshake deal with a company in Nebraska that many of you know. But I was told by its leader, Jason, we have a dying wildlife food plot product, or food plot line, for a few farmers who want something for deer, but we're not interested in getting into that food plot market. It's just too small, he said. He continued to say that the core of their business was to sell large volumes of cover crop seed to farmers and cattlemen. Although I was cautious, I was comfortable with a handshake deal because, to be quite honest with you, that's how I prefer to do business. So we began to teach right here on this podcast and in the field as I traveled around to visit with clients about things like plant secondary compounds and diet mixing, plant microbe relationships, soil health, regenerative agriculture, the importance of sequencing plants under given circumstances, nutritional wisdom of white-tailed deer, and one of my favorites, the medicinal applications in nature for wildlife, especially deer, and even humans. As soon as we started selling what I believed to be the best complementarities available in the seed industry, I moved on to seek something that I had been thinking about for some time. I had this gut feeling that seeds grown in healthy, biologically rich soils would turn on switches that remained hidden for generations. I planted all of my own products, generally 1 to 3 years before offering them to the public through the Drop-Tine Seed Company, and also thoroughly enjoyed immediate feedback from my customers and clients all over the country. I began noticing that some of these species struggled even in the most biologically rich soils we had available to us. I started documenting which species and under what conditions they seemed to struggle. Where did they thrive, and what management was applied? I quickly began to accept my suspicion that not all seeds are created equal, and how they were grown mattered. The traditional food plotters at the universities were still teaching the same old calculations for pure live seed and educating consumers on what acceptable germination rates are, but they never touched on whether seeds grown by regenerative farmers in healthy soils would perform better in regenerative management programs with very few or zero synthetic fertilizer inputs and biocides. So my suspicion was confirmed. Even modern seeds that aren't genetically modified but merely bred over and over in degraded soils are refined over time to perform better in those synthetic degraded systems that have been promoted by so many in industrial chemical agriculture. This isn't a problem and likely unnoticeable if you're farming on the wrong side of history. However, if you're like me and so many of my customers and consulting clients who seek to regenerate their ecosystems and eliminate the overuse of synthetics and harmful chemistries, you'd benefit from reaching back in time for seeds that were bred to do very well in biologically active, regenerative food plots with low or no synthetic inputs. So my guest today is no stranger to this idea. In fact, he knew this long before any of us, and I'll let him tell you just how long he's been at it. I'll also let him tell you his story about his quest to revive ancient wheat, rural jobs, and healthy food. So my guest today and my new skiing partner, Mr. Bob Quinn, visits us today from the beautiful state of Montana. Bob, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jason. It's great to be here. I wish you're here right now and enjoy a little snow with me, but from the forecast, maybe you'll be getting some of your own, I hear.
Yeah, this is one time where I hope I don't. I've got to rely on flights getting out of here to get back out and see clients. It's that time of the year, at least until June. It's what is it, late February, so I won't stop much. So the snow, it throws a wrench into my plans, but I'm sure it's beautiful out there.
Well, it is. So anyway, well, thanks for inviting me. It's a real honor to be in your show.
Absolutely, and likewise, it's a huge honor for us and my listeners. I started the podcast many years ago because I often said, boy, I wish some of these conversations that I have on a daily basis could be recorded and others could hear it because of the interesting people that I get to talk to, and this is one. This is going to be exciting for folks to listen to. So I'm going to go ahead and let you tell us, Bob, about what you think is important about why I guess your history, your quest to revive ancient wheat. I don't know that very many of our listeners have heard your story. Hopefully they have. And of course you sort of summarize it in a fantastic book that is a super easy read. I was telling you, the family pup chewed the corner of mine. And it's traveled through airports and all over camps all over the country, called Grain by Grain. So go ahead and give us a little bit of what you think is important about you.
Well, thank you. Well, I was raised here in Montana, about 12 miles southeast of a little town called Big Sandy. We're in the north central part of the state, on the prairie, between a small isolated mountain range called the Bears Paw Mountains and the Missouri River breaks. So although we're surrounded by prairie, we also can see the mountains and not part of the river. So we have a lot of variety. My grandfather started this farm in about wheat and cattle ranch it was in 1920. So we just passed our first century. My dad was raised here, and my sister and I were raised here, and I raised all my kids here. So we've been here for going on 3 full generations anyway. I went to local schools here in Big Sandy, and my biggest interest growing up, I had 2 great loves. One was plants and one was science. And so when I went to Montana State University, I combined those 2 loves and studied botany and plant pathology. Got a BS in botany and a master's in plant pathology, and then went on to UC Davis in California to get a PhD in plant biochemistry because I wanted to be a plant scientist. That's what I wanted to be. But I was a little disillusioned with academia when I finished. I finished my degree in '76, so it's been a while ago. And in those days, the labs were just in competition with one another and trying to get the next grant to fund their research, and we weren't even allowed to speak to some of our competing laboratories. And I thought that was a heck of a way to do science, that not even talk to folks who were trying to solve the same problems you were. It's a little bit different than that now, but that's what it was in those days, and I kind of opted out from that atmosphere and decided to end up after a couple of years of doing a small business in Northern California. I came back to the farm, and wasn't long before my whole farm became my laboratory and my garden later on. But in the beginning, we came back to a farm that's about 2,400 acres. It was about the average size for Montana, half wheat, half pasture, half cultivated grounds. We had a 50-head cow-calf operation of polled Herefords, and that was our diversity. We mostly raised winter wheat, spring wheat, barley, little oats for the cows, sometimes a little alfalfa. So that was our setup. And when we came back to the farm, I brought my family back. Of course, it was just about the right size for one family, but not really big enough for two. And so I had to figure out how we could bring more income into the farm to support two families. I didn't want to go to town and get a job or send my wife to town and get a job, because we came to be a family farm unit, and that's what we wanted to do. And after a couple of years, I finally hit on an idea to sell our grain directly to whole grain bakers in Southern California, and that's put us on a whole new road. We grow high protein winter wheat and spring wheat, and that's what they're looking for to make sprouted wheat breads. Mostly they were or whole grain breads, and we hit it off, and they were paying us a premium of $1 a bushel, which was, when the wheat was selling for $3, that was a huge advantage to us, an increase in our income, and it enabled us to bring enough income into the family farm to support two families. And that was the beginning of my trek, my conversion from being a commodity farmer to being a grower of food. And that was really the beginning that started it all.
I like that's a great segue to one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about. When you say, well, before I'm jumping to page 7. I have a lot of questions for you, so I'm trying to pick the most important ones. But when you say commodities farmer, can you build upon what you mean by that? Before you do, I do want to say that I read your book came out in 2019, I believe. Yeah. And the only reason I remember that is because I was already, we were selling my reload products. I had already been through a very, very deep dive here in my office with note cards on the walls and strings of yarn hanging from specific plant species to specific nutrients, and felt like we were really onto something. And then I was researching this idea of trying to find, as I told somebody one day, older, unmolested varieties of seeds. I didn't want seeds that had been grown, whether it's epigenetic effects or whatever, just simple evolution, that had been grown in degraded systems. I just felt like eventually we would hit a dead end, and we would be working very, very hard in organic and regenerative type systems with the wrong product, the wrong seed. So anyway, your book came out, and it was an aha moment for me, and I read it twice because it sort of backed up my claims and made me feel like I wasn't just making something up. So can you kind of tell us, well, before I say that, I do want to say that anything, when I read your book, it was great for me, for my personal health as well. I've shared, some of the Kamut bread that I make and other ancient grain breads that I like to make now in my Dutch oven for the family, and we'll have, French toast and whatever they want to make with the bread. But can you sort of talk about what you mean by commodities? You went from a commodities farmer and transitioned.
Well, actually, it happened like turning on a light switch. I was raised here with in a chemical industrial mold that we were taught, and we were surrounded by all the days of my growing up. As we were taught in in ag classes in high school. That's what they were taught in university, and all of our crop management classes or pathology classes of disease control and all this sort of stuff. The farmers, my neighbors were always had our ear tuned to the radio to see what the commodity prices were, because that made a big difference in what our income was going to be. The commodity prices were controlled by the commodity markets. They were in other states. They were far away from us. But that's just the way it was, and I didn't really think much about that. I started going to food shows when we actually, the one customer we had selling the wheat directly to, I mentioned to you, in Southern California, led us to expanding that business to creating a stone milling business where we were selling stone ground whole wheat flour, and then eventually organic grain and organic whole wheat flour. And we started attending food shows. And I was at a food show once in California, and this is probably 5 or 6 years after we got started. And a lady came up to me just right out of the blue, shook my hand very vigorously, looked right into my eyes and said, "Thank you for growing food for my family." And I thought, wow, no one ever thanked me for growing food for their family before, because as a wheat farmer, we're used to hauling our grain into the elevator by the truckload and dumping it in a big pit and having the elevator manager come out, and he takes samples and trying to find stuff that he can use as an excuse to cut the price and dock us, and if there's too many weeds or too much straw or too light a grain or whatever, that he can give us less money for it. And I never heard anything like "thank you" before. Wheat farmers don't go to farmers markets. We never see our end customers, and I think a lot of people just have the idea of we're commodity growers. That's how we're talked about by the USDA and experiment stations and the extension agents and all that kind of all those folks. And this is the first time the lady actually had thanked me for putting bread on her table and for her family. And it was just like a revelatory moment for me, I guess. And I came home after that experience, and I never grew another commodity again on my farm. I told everybody that. I said, I no longer grow commodities. I'm growing now food for people's health, well-being, for their vitality of their children, for the longevity of their parents or grandparents and aged folks. And that's what I do. I don't grow commodities anymore. And it really, by looking at your farm that way, it really changed the way I thought about it, and the way I thought about putting things on the ground and on the plants that would eventually end up on people's plates. And I think that was a big help to me in changing a lot of my attitudes and the way I looked at what I was doing from day to day.
Yeah, when you describe the commodities farming lifestyle, I didn't grow up a farmer. I'm not a farmer, but I talk to farmers daily, growers daily, because of the seed business. That strikes a nerve for me, and I was going to save this for later, but I want to make sure I talk about this right now. When I started getting into the specialty seeds, the ancient, the heirloom, it was, what I liked about it is you had these renegade, opposite of the herd mentality growers in a very, very small subset of farmers. There's not a lot of folks out there growing this type of seed, and that is 180 degrees from the commodities, corn, wheat, that kind of soybeans, those markets. And there's a lot of good getting into these older varieties, but one of the benefits that I did not see coming that hit me like a Mack truck is talking direct to a farmer. Now, I started saying small farmers, but I guess that's relative. But communicating directly to farmers, growers in, Canada, Montana, whatever, and getting pictures of their kids holding the grains so that I can see what they looked like. And we don't, when I mentioned initially dealing with that supplier who kind of partnered with me essentially in Nebraska with my seeds early on, it was all about how much volume can you sell? How much volume can we buy from a grower, and how much can we beat him or her down so that we can save an extra penny per pound? And it just never felt right to me. As I started meeting growers who grow these ancient grains, as you said, for food as thy medicine and medicine as food, they would tell me stories. They were very cautious about, I'm excited. So I talked to a grower who maybe has a few thousand acres, and he's maybe growing einkorn or whatever he's growing. And I say, hey, we'd like, all of the Corazon wheat that you can grow. He says, well, I have 7,000 acres or 4,000 acres. That's an awful lot. They have heard all the promises before from these large, distributors and seed dealers. And they tell me stories about growing out massive amounts of seed to only find out the next year that particular customer or seed distributor found it for a penny per pound cheaper or closer. So logistically, the costs of shipping were that much more. And they would say to me, they'd say, Jason, we've never had anybody ask us how we grow it or what our Haney soil tests look like, or would we be interested in an ST1 that looks at the real-time in situ CO2 reading and the biological activity in the soil. That's what I want to know about. I don't want to talk about price first. So I guess to me, it's all context, but when you talk about commodity farmers and the USDA, I think subsidies, I think massive amounts of I don't know if you would call it food, but products that are, in quotes, meant to feed the world. Am I accurate on that?
Well, that's the focus, and that's the big roar cry of the big chemical companies that we're here to feed the world. I don't buy that. I think if we're here to do anything, we're here to help the world feed itself. And the better job we can do that, the better health we're going to be. In this country, we have 60% of our people have at least one chronic disease, and 40% have two or more. I can't say that, and CDC themselves say that 60% of the cause of that lies directly at the foot of our diets and the quality and the nutritional value of our food. You can't say that that's a successful operation that we'd want to, or a successful system that we'd want to export to the whole world. And do we want the whole world as sick as we are? This is insane. And it's getting worse year by year because we're not changing our direction very fast. But the faster we change our direction and start focusing on food as medicine that you mentioned, and medicine as our food, and starting to pay farmers for nutrition per pound rather than pounds per acre or whatever the yields, focus on quality and nutrient density, the sooner we're going to start to turn that around. Mm-hmm. But that's why I think the focus has been completely backwards, but it's made a few people a very great fortunes. And that's why it's hard to change, because there's so much money being made in the chemical agricultural industry now, and also with the pharmaceutical folks that are selling all the sick people. That 60% of the population that's chronically ill, they are all on drugs. Mm-hmm. And so the pharmaceutical companies are having a glory day with this. They're making billions and billions of dollars, and now some companies like Bayer are playing both sides of the game. They have their agricultural chemicals that are aiding to extract the wealth out of rural America, in the case of the United States, aiding to make people who eat the end products ill, and then they sell them the pills that don't really cure anything. It just makes them more comfortable and maybe prolongs their life a little bit until they can spend all their money, I guess. But this is completely the wrong approach, and that's why I've really opted for a different way and a different viewpoint, and share many of the things that you've been talking about. Absolutely. And again, all of this conveys over to wildlife and deer, so don't get too far, lost in this. I personally, and I'm certainly no
poster child of health, but I try my best. And after reading your book and doing some of the other research that I had done, we replaced all of our flours and grains in the house with Kamut and with some other grains that I call the companies and ask them how they grow the product. So it's had a huge impact. So I want to get right to, I think I shared this with you earlier. And I mentioned it in the intro there, my feelings that seeds grown or produced by producers in biologically active, either organic, regenerative organic, or regenerative soils are certainly have a much better start in life. It's absolutely the seed that you should buy if you are in a regenerative or organic system. And the nutritive value of those plants ultimately is far greater than seeds grown in that sort of commodity production model that you were just describing, where quantity is of priority and yields, tonnage, etc. Is that, can you build on that from your experience at all?
Sure, I would. We've heard a lot of talk about healthy soils produce healthy food, and healthy food produces or is a reason for good health in our people. But I would also like to add to that, the beginning of that chain, and that's a very important chain, and that's a true principle for sure. But if we start with good seed, then we stack the deck even more in our favor. And the seed that I've studied probably more than any other in my lifetime is wheat. I grew up raising wheat, so I knew about it. And we stumbled onto an ancient grain when I was first came back to the farm. It was something that was in the county reported as kind of a novelty, supposedly out of a tomb in Egypt. Made a great story. When I went to Cairo, I found that wasn't really true. But when I went to Turkey doing experiments there, because we experimented with this grain all over the world, wherever wheat is grown. In Turkey, they told me this is the grain that came off Noah's Ark. So I thought that was even a better story than my tomb story. And so you can take whatever legend you like, but it's certainly very old. It doesn't have great yield potential. They call it camel's tooth there because it's about 2 or 3 times the size of regular wheat. It's a very close relative to durum. And for most people, excuse me, the thing that really caught my attention as in my scientific side of me was that we gave it to a friend who couldn't not eat wheat, and she was very, I wouldn't say allergic, but sensitive to wheat, and she couldn't eat any, and she could eat this, and she said not only could she eat it, but she felt better when she did, and she asked if we could she'd have some for her sister who had many food sensitivities, and we sent down a box of pasta that we were experimenting with, having it made into pasta. And her sister called back in a few weeks and said not only could she eat it, but after eating it for several weeks, she was less sensitive to other foods. So it was providing some kind of a healing to her system, and that really astounded me. I never really thought of food as medicine before. And that put me on another trail of us I pursued for many, many years now. So we started some research, mostly in Italy, because 30 years ago, most scientists didn't believe there's anything wrong with our wheat. Even though now we see that almost 20% of the population can no longer eat modern wheat without some kind of distress. And it's all over the board, from really debilitating cramps and stomach pains to just hives or just headaches or upset stomachs or whatever. But that is due mostly because of the changes we've made in wheat and breeding programs, which are focusing only on increasing yields without any respect, or, well, it was not done on purpose, of course, but without any thought that anything would happen to nutrition or anything else that was going on. Well, it's just like a bucket of water. You can't fill a bucket of water more than full. And so if you're adding things to a wheat plant that increases yields, decreases its size, increases its gluten strength, its resistance to disease, you're adding all these things, something's going to fall out or diminish because you can't add more water than a bucket will hold, and that's a little bit of an analogy that you can think about. And so what's fallen out are things that protect people from being affected adversely by other stuff that's in wheat. They changed the gluten so that it makes a higher bread volume, but the gluten now has become so complex that many people have trouble digesting it. These ancient grains that we're working with, and after we found that, we started marketing it under our own trademark, which we registered, which was Kamut, which is an ancient Egyptian word for wheat. And what we found in our research was that it was easier to digest. We did studies on chronic disease, of heart disease, and these are human clinical studies that we did. So they weren't just test tube or all animal studies. These were people that were studying with heart disease, with diabetes, with irritable bowel syndrome, with fibromyalgia, with all the major clinical or chronic diseases that exist in the world. And we found there was a significant improvement in their health and also in their tests. When we tested for anti-inflammatory properties, the inflammation was greatly reduced. But as far as inflammation indicators, there was a very big increase in antioxidant capacity. For the diabetics, they had a lower sugar in the blood. The blood sugar was reduced. The insulin was reduced. Insulin resistance was reduced. And we also saw minerals increase in the blood with a diet of this ancient wheat compared to a diet of modern wheat. And all these studies were double-blind crossover studies where people ate both diets of modern wheat and ancient wheat, one by one, not knowing which one they're eating. And then they had a crossover period, or a washout period where they didn't eat, where they ate whatever they wanted, and then they had the other diet for 6 weeks. And then we did the final analysis. So that was a real eye-opener to me, that the things that we have changed just to increase our yield has actually done some very significant and measurable changes in wheat, which is a big kind of the bread of life. I mean, it's a staple in our diets and in the diets of many people in the world. And you wonder, after thousands of years, and wheat being the grain that built the ancient civilizations of Rome and Babylon and Egypt and all these countries, all of a sudden, why are so many people now unable to eat it and get sick if they do? So that's what was a big eye-opener to me, and I'm wondering how many other seeds and crops have been bred intensely just to increase yields and then have also lost in nutrition. The research hasn't been done on that, but I think it'd be very interesting to look at it.
So just to kind of recap that, because obviously everybody has probably seen the whole gluten-free push, and we've all heard people blame wheat, but just generally wheat. What can you kind of repeat what the gluten? And I think it's chapter 13 in your book where you talk about the gluten mystery. Can you explain a little bit more about the gluten mystery and how that?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. And I think it's too bad that, well, of course, going wheat-free or gluten-free is an easy answer to avoid the trouble, but it doesn't solve anything. There's lots of really good properties in wheat that are really good for your health. And when you go wheat-free or gluten-free, oftentimes people don't get those minerals and vitamins that come with wheat that are important for your health in other foods, unless they're very, very careful in how they're putting together nutrition. So I encourage people not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not gluten itself that's inherently or innately evil or bad for you. It's what we've done to it. It's the changes we've made to it. It's not a qualitative difference. It's a quantitative difference. We changed the quality of the gluten. We've changed in focusing on just one industrial aspect of it. For example, how it can make better bread and more bread, so you can have more bread with less wheat because it rises so much. It's filling with air, so bakers can now sell air for the price of wheat. They're loving that. And if we went back to the older varieties or varieties that hadn't been bred so much, the heirloom varieties or the ancient varieties, many times, in many cases, people can eat that bread without difficulty because the gluten has not been changed. People often tell me if they go to Europe and they can eat the bread there, but they can't eat it here. I know then for sure that they can eat the Kamut and probably other ancient wheats or heirloom grains because in Europe they haven't changed their wheat and hence their gluten as much as we have. And that's a telltale example of what we've done to industrialize something it's created a new problem that's even much worse than the one we're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you were talking about filling up the water bucket, that's a great analogy. And as I started to make breads for my kids, we would be out at restaurants and the server would bring bread over to the table and they would kind of scoff at it and say, and just notice differences in the, just kind of the inside of the bread and the air in the bread. And I'm not a bread person, but as you look at things like this and just observe, they would say, Dad, this bread is all air. It's nothing like yours, which is much tighter, and it tastes so much better. And again, I'm not a bread maker, so it wasn't, I don't deserve the credit. I just started to buy, better flour. And I think the key to, I guess, that gluten sensitivity issue is inflammation, right? So a lot of foods, I believe, I think you'll agree with me, especially seeds sort of grown and selected for traits other than nutrient density and richness, namely just yield and, just certain hardy, whether disease resistance or winter hardy or whatever, they're losing the phytonutrients, they're losing the secondary compounds, and they result in inflammation. And I think, honestly, if there was one thing that we should eliminate, whether we're talking about deer, turkeys, humans, or you name it, your dog, I personally believe that the cause of most of the problems we have, not just the symptom, but the underlying cause is inflammation.
Well, that's right. And also, if you add to that the poisons, the herbicides, pesticides that are added to crops, many of those are big culprits in causing inflammation. We have people spraying Roundup on genetically altered crops that just routinely now, and we have it in our state, using it as a substitute for cultivation. So they have chem-fallow. So we only grow a crop in Montana and in the upper Great Plains where it's quite dry, where we're looking at 12 or 13 inches of rain once every 2 years. In the off year, we cultivate or we don't grow a cash crop in those years, that we're saving water. And so now that the most popular way to save that water is with chem-fallow spraying with Roundup 4 or 5 or 6 times a day or a year, a season. And Roundup affects not only plants, it kills all plants that aren't resistant to it by genetic alterations, but it also kills many bacteria that live in our gut. And so when you have traces on your food, it's starting to disrupt the normal gut flora and their metabolism. So you've got that also going on. So you've got a compound of low nutrient food coming in, and then also telltale traces of chemicals. And that's why when you talk about, before you're talking about regenerative, I always combine regenerative and organic, because I think that then you have something that's defined. If you just have regenerative by itself, it's all over the board. People are calling themselves regenerative and still using chemicals and poisons and GMOs and all that stuff. But if you combine it with organic, then you know exactly what you're talking about, and you have the best of both worlds. And that's what I like to promote.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Now, can you talk a little bit, and I'm excited. We have a lot more products in the works, and seed offerings. Can you talk a little bit about the Kamut brand and how that differs from Corzon wheat? Which, by the way, in our new Ancient Grains blend, you and I have talked about this. I have a grower who has sold us quite a bit of Corzon, but we are also going to have Kamut products moving forward. I think we're in the process of working on that.
Good.
Yeah,
I'd love to
yeah.
have this.
Thanks to
Well,
you.
the difference is that the Corson is a common name for the grain that we're growing and selling under the Kamut brand. The the difference is that, like, a common name of the grain is just the name of the grain. It doesn't mean anything about how it's grown or give you any promises other than it's that grain, supposedly that grain. You can have the same thing with spelt. Spelt is a common name for a certain type of grain, but you can have modern spelt, which is way different than the ancient spelt. And there's no way to know the difference just by using the name. With the trademark doesn't mean we own the grain or anything. It means that we make certain guarantees to our customers. And the guarantees we make with the Kamut trademark is that it's always regeneratively, organically grown. It's always 100% ancient wheat. We don't allow any mixing with modern wheat, even though the prices are quite a bit different. We test it for purity, for disease, so that we can guarantee that there's no disease in it. Also, we test it for protein. We do a complete nutritional profile, and we only sell that which is over a certain level of protein, which we guarantee. Some minerals and vitamins are also guaranteed, like selenium. There's enough selenium in it normally that takes selenium up in greater concentrations than modern wheat. And 3 tablets a day normally gives you a daily requirement for selenium, for example. We also require people who are using the trademark to tell the truth about it, so they don't exaggerate qualities that haven't been demonstrated or tested, and they have to have truth in labeling. So you can't put 5% of Kamut grain in a cookie and call it a Kamut cookie. It has to be, if you're going to call it something Kamut, it has to be over 50% if it's a food product on the front label. So those are the main things that we do. In the farmers, we require them to be regenerative organic in the sense that they are required to grow a soil-building crop as a green manure or cover crop a year before the Kamut crop is grown, for example. We don't allow them to plant more than 15 to 20% of their farm in Kamut Khorasan, because we don't want to disrupt the rotations that keep the organic system, the regenerative organic system, healthy and strong. And so we offer a few other things to help the organic system be viable and be really regenerative. So those are the things that's different. You don't get any of that with just buying the generic Khorasan. It doesn't come with any promises.
Mm-hmm. That fascinated me early on, because that proved that you clearly saw the need for seed to be grown, not just a marketing scheme of this is an ancient grain or King Tut's wheat, which is a great story, right? But but the priority was placed on how it was grown, and in your case, that was organic. And when I read that, this is after I was already thinking, at some point we're going to have to find growers, pay them a premium, don't beat them down on price. And this, I think, is where the rubber meets the road, because you have these large cover crop dealers and seed salesmen, seedsmen, and I don't think a lot of people realize, well, maybe in the ag world they do, but probably not my listeners, that the bigger chemical companies, like you said, are buying up all of these, even the small, highly profitable, successful mom and pop seed companies. They're consolidating in this massive effort to buy up the seed companies, and that should be just as frightening as China buying farmland in America. But I don't think a lot of people are even paying attention to that. And I'm looking at one of your Let's see. It's a nutritional analysis of the Kamut brand, and it shows 65% more amino acids. These are some of the things that caught my attention as a wildlife biologist and a deer guy, and somebody who works with properties all over the country, trying to make them unique, make them an island, and get, we're already killing 180 to 190 inch whitetails on some properties. How much more can you fill that bucket up, right? But obviously it's my job to decide how to build a bigger bucket. So when I look at this, and I've read where, some elite athletes, as you probably know more than I do, prefer grains like Kamut because it's a high energy grain. And, when you're talking about higher energy in the form of lipids, to me as a deer guy, I'm game on that, because I know for a fact that whitetails have a nutritional wisdom. They have obviously, rut stress and winter stress and periods of the year fawning, etc., where
Sure.
they're not in great condition, and they know through that flavor feedback mechanism what plant they need to go to, or they will not make it to another breeding season. So, any other experience on? I was just curious because I'm kind of interested in sports and athletes using these grains as a high energy source.
Sure. Well, sure. It's all life, and all living things are going to respond similarly. And in Italy, I can tell you where the Kamut is the most widely known. Many of the soccer teams there are only eating that, and I find that their recovery times have improved, their energy levels have improved, that they can notice it. And that was pretty interesting to us too when they first started telling us that. And as far as wildlife, we haven't done any deer studies. We haven't done any wildlife studies, to tell you the truth. But we have.
We can fix that.
That'd be fun. That would be fun. In Austria, I can tell you, where we'd had some test plots out, that the rabbits preferred the Kamut over any other test plot, and they ate it up first, and it was all gone. So that was it was a disaster for our test, but kind of an interesting a testimonial from the rabbits. And when we went to India, the parrots ate it, and they preferred it over any other grain. And so our tests were a failure there because the parrots had eaten up all of our grain. So we have had a few animal testimonials, along with the athletic testimonials too, scattered around. And we haven't really studied that or set that. As I talked about with you, maybe that would be some interesting things to do in the future, because animals certainly have an innate instinct to know what they need, and they go looking for it. And depending on what they need, they try to find what they can find to satisfy those needs. And the humans aren't. We probably had it at one time too, a little bit more, but it's been completely wiped out with sugar and processing aids and salt and flavors and all this other stuff that's added to food.
Absolutely. I think another important topic is that we need to be paying more for food as medicine, and a lot less in an area that is actually sort of a misspoken terminology, in my opinion, in healthcare, which is actually just sick care in America. I've heard and I've read in multiple sources, and I know you touch on this because it's kind of in your wheelhouse, that we're spending roughly the same amount of money that our grandparents did on that combination of food and healthcare. I don't even like saying the words healthcare. This is not healthcare. But the percentages have flipped. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And I think, by the way, my point is we need to be paying more for food. When I hear people complaining about buying pasture raised or chickens raised on cover crops or free range or whatever, and you look at the eggs and they look, we do this on my farm, the eggs look completely different and feel different, and just everything's different about them compared to store purchased eggs. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to mention, you've kind of touched on this here a couple times already, on the give and take for the way the system's all set up. Is the food system is mostly set up in a win-lose situation. So each step along the way, everybody's trying to get as much they can out of the the ones ahead of them so they can sell it to the ones following and make more money, more profit. And I think we need to really rethink how we do our business from a win-lose type of business model to a win-win business model where everybody wins. And that's what I think is the best hope for the future. The people who are winning, who are farmers, if they're able to receive enough for growing their food, growing their products. Right now, a lot of government subsidies are out there because farmers don't receive enough to pay all the inputs. Wonder if they could grow more of their inputs. Wonder if they could receive a fair price for what they produce. Wouldn't that be a great thing? And wonder if the people buying what they produce had the advantage of winning because the value of it was so much more than the industrial stuff that's in most of the big grocery stores and little grocery stores, but the commodity stuff that's been manufactured in a very industrial way so that it looks nice, tastes nice, but doesn't have the nutritional level it needs. I wonder if we focus on having nutrition that we need to reduce the sick care costs, as you say. And so in the end, we pay a little more for our food and we save a lot more at the doctor's office. That would be really a great trade. And if we would focus on that and educate people on that and maybe figure out a way to put a nutritional label, maybe an anti-inflammatory label, it's an idea we've been working with in our company and some of my scientific friends in Italy that we've worked with, so that people could see what the value of that food was and why they should pay more and the value of paying more for it. And that would be a natural driver to produce, to go back to the farmers to produce food in a way that would be more nutritious, and they would receive a premium for that.
Absolutely. And again, that sort of trickle down, I hate that term, trickle down effect to the growers. I want my growers to get paid more. And I think they'll be far more loyal in the future because of that. And it gives them the ability to maybe purchase, something extra for their planter or their drill, or spend more money looking, as you have here, looking at the the nutritional analysis of their plants or their crops or their forages. It just makes total sense to me. That's where we're headed. As I watch companies buy up truckloads and container loads full of seed without asking or even thinking about how those seeds were grown and produced, it cracks me up because here's an analogy I just told a client in Maryland. You take every whitetail deer hunter who knows a little bit about the management or listens to a few podcasts or reads a magazine knows that a doe that is on high quality habitats will most certainly produce healthier fawns that have a much better start in life. I don't know that you can find anyone who argues with that. Even in the scientific world, I don't think I've ever heard anybody argue with that. When you start to study maternal effects and you look at some of the research that Mississippi State has done, that's mind-blowing. My 16-year-old was reading one of my books on an airplane here, and out of all the interesting stuff in this deer book, what fascinated him the most was maternal effects and how bucks got bigger after their mothers were moved to better range. It just took a couple of years for that to happen. Yeah. And in my opinion, I think it's obvious, not just my opinion, but we will see the same thing when it comes to plant nutritional quality once we start to demand more growers to produce seeds in whether it's organic or regeneratively organic or just a better, higher quality, not quality, but a more nutritionally, biologically active soil. I think that's where we need to go. And I feel like obviously anytime there's significant change, it wasn't a title, but it was a subheading, I believe. You called it "Change is Dangerous." I like that. It needs to come from the people. And we need to, when I say that food, our food, deer food, it should be more expensive. It should cost more. I'm not saying it should remain status quo as far as quality. I'm saying we need to demand a better quality and pay more for it. As you said,
Exactly.
pay less for the pay less later at your doctor's office.
Yeah. So it's, instead of a race to the bottom to see how cheap we can get our food, why don't we have a race to the top and see how much we can save in health and having better health? And it's the same with your wildlife, your deer. I mean, they will be healthier too. I mean, why? A lot of people who are deer hunters are eating the meat and they're taking it home to their families. Why would you want to take home something that has been grazing on fields full of poisons and plants that are less nutritious than they were as natives in the native pastures or whatever, than we have now? That's part of what we've done with the industrialization of the meat industry, with confined feedlots and all this stuff, and putting weight on and pounds and fast gains and all this stuff, and producing meat that's really not very healthy for us anymore. And a lot of people, friends of mine, they like that about wild meat, that it's more healthy. But why? Let's keep it that way, and let's make it even more healthy by giving them more food that increases their health and vitality, which you know much more than I do about that. But it's just logical extension that everything else I've been studying and believe.
Yeah, I'm a part of an email group, I guess you can say, of wildlife veterinarians who know what I do, and they actually, and some of them are in your part of the country. They will find, whether it's roadkill or hunter harvested whitetail, and they have the ability, the lab equipment, because it's what they do professionally, to test the organs for things like glyphosate, et cetera. And many times what a lot of people don't realize is we already know this. They just do not want, as a scientist, it's very hard in today's society to report things like that, because you don't have to go very far before you find, big agricultural, chemical agrochemistry supporting research or paying for a new building at a university. So they tend to just send it out to colleagues, and they're always sending me test results from road-killed and hunter-harvested animals that have frighteningly high amounts of glyphosate and other chemicals in the not only the organs but in the tissues as well. So yeah, absolutely. And I think those of us who do enjoy eating venison, I actually personally prefer my beef grazing on multi-species cover crops from Gabe Brown's ranch and others. And my kids do too, which is if you ever want to have an experiment, my wife and I do this. We'll purchase quote unquote grass fed or regeneratively grown. Like I said, I know of Gabe and Paul Brown. I know how they operate their ranch. And when we purchase fillets from them, and I feed my Traeger with those, the taste, the flavor profile is far surpasses anything you're going to buy locally. And that whole buy local is sort of we need to feed the world times two. If you have somebody locally who is farming organically and regeneratively, then sure, great. But it's time that we demand a little bit more. I guess maybe just ask more from the growers. Sure. And that's what we're doing. I want to assure everyone that this is the direction we've been going ever since I started down this path, especially after I finally got the Reload blend, spring, summer, and fall blends going back in, I guess, 17, 18, somewhere in there. I immediately focused my attention on this segment, and I don't know that we have a specific certification or verification written down just yet, but when I call growers, they're surprised when I say I want to come visit and see and hear about their their management and how they're growing food. So
yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm good friends with Gabe Brown. We've exchanged a lot, shared a lot of talks together, and I really admire what he's done and the influence he's had. And that's really important, that people start to take more seriously what we're doing to the land, how we're growing our food, and then resulting what it's resulting in. The positive things it's resulting in, not only at the farm level, but the communities, to the planet, and reducing pesticide and herbicide and insecticide pollutions, and then finally our health. Those all four of those are affected in a very positive way that can be driven by people at the shopping in the store and just choosing those labels when they see them. When they see organic, they know that they are solving problems that are really affecting us in a very serious way. And that's what I see as the future. And we're up to 6% of the food now in America is organic. And at the current rate of growth, in another 35 years, if we can wait that long, it would be 100%. It's the fastest growing segment of agriculture right now. And so that's why I'm really excited about it and trying to promote it every chance I get. And I appreciate the things that you're doing, even in a different area, but thinking about it's the same planet we're living on, and we're sharing it with all the wildlife. Mm-hmm. And so goes the wildlife, so go we. And I think that's a really important connection to make and for people to think about.
I find that the wildlife are much easier to work with than humans. So I'm going to leave the human being segment to guys like you, and I'm going to focus on the wildlife. They cooperate, and they actually, as Fred Provenza has taught me, they have a lot to teach us if we just learn to observe. Yeah. So, well, very good, Bob. I think we've gone. Well, we're good. But is there anything else that I'm missing that you believe to be extremely important to discuss surrounding this topic?
Well, I just reiterate again the importance of the direction we're going. We're polluting our earth right now to the point that we have Roundup in the rain that falls on our farm. Even though we're a regenerative organic farm, we still have traces of Roundup because of the chemical that pesticide that's used so abundantly that we have it now contaminating rainfall. And I think it's time to reassess the direction we're going and reevaluate the values that we put on food and health, and try to understand how they are inseparably connected. And so we can either pay now or we can pay later. And it's a lot more fun, I think, to pay now and enjoy our life later rather than save a few cents now on cheap food and suffer later with poor health. And those are the choices, I think, that it's not so difficult to understand. And the more we think about it, the more we promote it by what we say and what we do and what we eat and what we buy, the more impact we will make.
Very good. I appreciate that. And before I talk a little bit about your book, I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for reintroducing me and everyone else to this idea of ancient heirloom grains, and I think really just honestly any seeds that were planted in a completely different ecosystem. And I think that they will forever be a critical component. I know these seeds and sources will forever be a critical component of my ecosystem restoration projects on farms all over the country. And I'm not just talking about deer. I'm talking about the granivores, the birds, the turkeys, the quail, the whole 9 yards. So thank you for that. And if you can you talk a little bit real quick about your book, Grain by Grain, and where they can buy it? And maybe a little bit about Liz Carlisle too, who actually super cool, who was you're a tough guy to get a hold of. And back when we first spoke, it was because of Liz. So I should mention that. I appreciate her.
Well, I do too. I spent about 5 years trying to write a book and share my experiences in a way that would have a wider audience and people could learn about it. And I took it to my favorite publisher, and they turned me down flat and said they thought it was too business-oriented. And I was a little discouraged by that. And I had met Liz before because she had done a Little Underground book here which was about many of my friends and neighbors in our area. And she'd been on our farm, and also I had met her before. And I asked her if she'd like to be interested in doing a book together. I said, I'm not looking for a ghostwriter, I'm looking for a partner and writing a book together. And she agreed to do that. It was the best decision ever made. And so in 5 months, she put together something that was accepted by 5 publishers that I couldn't do in 5 years. And we had 3 really, really good offers, and we went with Island Press, and then we went on a book tour. She kind of coached me in book tours. I'd never done anything like that before. She had, and she's been a great help and asset. She took my story and put it into a really, as you mentioned earlier, light and readable format. And I really appreciate that about her. So anyway, it's been a great team effort. So I also am very appreciative to her.
Yeah, and it's a great book. It's a very easy read, and I would recommend it for anyone who eats.
Well, you can get it online. Barnes & Noble had it. All the major bookstores had it. And if they don't have it on the shelf now, they can order it for you, or you can get it wherever you'd like to get books.
Very good.
It's available in audio. It's available in text, and what do they call it? Computer style and everything. So it's available however you want it.
There you go.
Kindle. That's what I'm trying to think of. And so it's in paperback now. It's hardcover. Whatever you like, it's available.
Very good. Yeah, and it is definitely on my recommended reading list. Highly recommend it.
Well, thank you.
Well, very good, Bob. We will we'll have you back on after we get that wildlife research done.
We should do something like that. I'm very interested in that. That's an area we haven't really gone into. And yet, like you said, the animals can be our best teachers. As you've mentioned from Fred's book and others have pointed this out. And I think we should pay more attention to that.
Amen. Okay, well, very good. I know you're busy, so we will let you run. And I'll talk to you soon about a couple other things. Have a great evening, and thank you so much.
Okay, thanks you, my friend, and call us and come visit anytime.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye now.
All right, bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Again, I highly recommend Bob's book, Grain by Grain. And, of course, the Drop-Tine Ancient Grain blend is selling, and I'm excited about more that are coming right behind it. Corazon wheat, einkorn, spelt, red fife, even buckwheat is an ancient grain. And we have that in our Ancient Grains blend that is actually grown by a regenerative farmer who is a very, very good farmer and committed to soil health. So a very good blend. Super excited about that. Just briefly, I know there's going to be a lot of questions for those who are interested in it. You do plant it in early spring, roughly an inch deep at about 100 pounds per acre. Ancient Grains for Wildlife is honestly, it's the first seed blend of its kind, sourced from ancient heirloom and heritage grains, specifically for wildlife food plots. Yes, we're crazy. We strictly source our ancient grains, as I've said many times in this podcast, from farmers who follow the soil health principles and regenerative farming practices. In this blend, we've added 3 ancient grains, a heritage grain, and as I mentioned, buckwheat. Ancient and heirloom grains are far more nutrient dense and up to 40% higher in protein. Our selection of nutritionally superior grains possess higher concentrations of antler-building vitamins, minerals, and secondary compounds, and they also offer medicinal compounds for wildlife and possess a noticeably sweet, buttery flavor profile. If you don't believe me, don't ask the deer. Just get some flour and make some bread. There's an obvious 110% difference. And again, some of the benefits real quick, 20 to 35% more protein, depending on the soils they're grown in and the nutritional analysis. 2 to 3 times larger the size of modern wheat. The giant grains have a sweet, buttery, nutty flavor profile. They are grown by our vetted and verified regenerative farmers. This is something new that we'll have to talk about here in the future. And we enjoy supporting new markets. This really has been something that I wasn't expecting, but it's been what would I call it? I guess a rewarding aspect of this when you see family farms with new markets and new outlets for their grain that they weren't sure that they could, find a market for. And of course, we're encouraging them to focus on quality over quantity. The larger root system, which is going to be huge in our regenerative systems, much larger root systems than modern wheat. There are no middlemen. We source them right from the grower, the family farms. They are grown, crafted, and sourced with care and attention to detail for higher value seeds and wildlife forages. In fact, the grains in the Ancient Grains blend are actually cleaned to food spec because our growers, if they don't sell them to us, quite honestly, they're selling them to the food markets, breads, pastas, etc. So again, the result of, I say 5 years, it's been longer than that, I think, of research. The spring planted ancient heritage grain blend was sourced from the highly vetted farmers practice regenerative agriculture. And I know there's been a couple questions already online, and I've gotten some emails. They do run through a drill. You can plant them very easily. None of them will be hard to seed. In fact, they're all cleaned and dehulled, including spelt. So they essentially just look like different sized wheat seeds. Super excited to get them into your food plots. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will have more for you soon.